All right, so today we're diving into a story that honestly sounds like it could be straight out of like a Tom Clancy novel.
Yeah, like a military thriller or something.
Exactly. We're talking about the only confirmed shoot-down of an F-117 Nighthawk stealth aircraft.
Yeah. The plane designed to be basically invisible to radar.
Right.
It's a super interesting case study. It really challenges what people think they know about tech and warfare.
Oh, for sure.
So the source for our deep dive today is a YouTube video by YarnHub.
I've seen that one.
Yeah, it's called How a Nighthawk Was Shot Down.
Catchy title.
It is, and they lay out the events of this incredible event really well.
So, like, set the scene for us. Where does this story actually take place?
Okay, so picture this.
Yeah.
It's March 27th, 1999, during the NATO bombing of Yugoslavia,
Okay.
and Lieutenant Colonel Daryl Zelko is piloting his F-117 on a mission over Serbia.
So right in the thick of it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
At this point, the F-117 had this almost mythical reputation.
I can imagine.
Yeah, it was like the cutting edge of tech, designed to get past all those defenses and hit those really important targets with pinpoint accuracy.
Right. They called it the most advanced operational fighter bomber ever to have flown in the video.
And they're not exaggerating.
Hmm.
But there's a twist. Zelko starts as part of a larger group,
Okay.
but bad weather forces his F-16 escorts to turn back.
So he's on his own.
Yeah, and those F-16s are crucial for suppressing enemy radar. They act like a shield for Zelko's F-117.
Makes sense.
And without them, he's flying solo into enemy territory, relying only on stealth tech.
And that had never failed before, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Up to this point, it was foolproof.
Man, talk about pressure.
Right. What must have been going through his mind at this point?
I can only imagine, like, should I abort? Should I keep going?
He had to be weighing those risks.
Yeah.
But the thing is, the F-117 was made for exactly this.
These high-stakes solo missions?
Yeah, it was built on the idea that stealth would make it basically undetectable.
Right.
But there's another side to this story unfolding on the ground, too.
Okay, this is where it gets interesting.
Yeah, so on the Serbian side, we have Lieutenant Colonel Zoltan Dani and his team.
Okay.
And they're determined to prove that even the invisible can be brought down.
I love it. Already sounds like a movie.
Right. They got some intel that suggested NATO stealth aircraft were in the area.
Oh, so they were ready.
They were listening.
Yeah.
Now, the radar they had was a modified Soviet-era P-18.
Okay.
It operates at low frequencies.
Why is that important?
Well, in theory, that could help detect stealth aircraft.
Hold on, back up a sec. Why would they choose that radar? Especially if it can be messed up by the weather.
It seems counterintuitive.
Right? Totally.
But that's where the ingenuity comes in.
Yeah.
You see, stealth tech mainly focuses on deflecting those high-frequency radar waves.
Okay.
Those are the ones most air defense systems use.
Right.
But low-frequency radar is less precise and prone to interference.
Sure.
But it has longer wavelengths, and sometimes they can bounce off those flat surfaces of a stealth aircraft.
Really?
Yeah, and that creates a faint signal.
So they could actually see it.
It was a long shot, but they were hoping to catch just a glimpse of this ghost.
I love that. They're really taking on this huge challenge.
Oh, yeah. The weather's bad. The signal is weak.
It's like David versus Goliath.
It is. They're trying to take down this super advanced aircraft with this old tech.
And did they pull it off?
Well, it was a bold strategy, and it was about to pay off.
That's
The video goes into how intense it was as Zelko is approaching his target,
Yeah.
and Donnie's team is struggling to lock on it. They have those moments of doubt,
Makes sense.
false signals, all while knowing that time is running out.
So what was the turning point? What finally gave them the confirmation?
Okay, so as Zelko is about to drop his bombs, he opens his bomb bay doors.
Ah, I see where this is going.
Right, and that changes the radar signature of his aircraft.
Just for a moment.
Yeah, but it happens right as the Serbian radar is pointing in the right direction.
Talk about being in the right place at the right time.
It's incredible, right? So they have their confirmation. The ghost is real.
They must have been freaking out.
I bet. They scramble to lock on with their targeting radar.
So they're racing against the clock.
They only had 20 seconds to get a firing solution.
That's not a lot of time.
No, it isn't. It's actually remarkable that they were able to react so quickly.
So what happens next?
They fired 2 missiles.
Wait, 2? Why 2?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
And it shows how uncertain they were. Most systems only use 1 missile.
Yeah, to take down a target.
Right. Firing 2 shows a lack of confidence.
Yeah.
In hitting a target as stealthy and maneuverable as the F-117.
So they were making sure.
Yeah, hoping at least one would connect.
And what about Zelko?
Well, as those missiles are flying towards him, he manages to drop his bombs on target.
So he completed his objective?
He did. But his mission is far from over.
Hmm.
Just seconds after releasing the bombs, his cockpit is going crazy with alarm.
He's been detected.
He has.
So even with all that stealth, there's no guarantee.
Exactly. And this is where we see the problems with the F-117's design.
How so?
Well, it was made for stealth, but it didn't have those traditional countermeasures.
Like,
Things like flares or chaffs, the things used to confuse heat-seeking or radar-guided missiles.
right.
So once it was detected, it was basically a sitting duck.
So what happened? Did he dodge the missiles?
He did at least the first one. He's a skilled pilot.
Dodged a missile. Wow, that's some Top Gun stuff.
It is. But unfortunately, the second missile explodes close enough to cripple the Nighthawk,
Oh, no.
and Zelko is forced to eject. He had to endure some crazy G-forces
Oh, I can't even imagine.
and the fear of hitting his own disintegrating aircraft.
That's insane. He actually said later that it felt like time slowed down.
Yeah, that's something you hear a lot from people in these extreme situations.
Right. It's like that fight or flight response.
It's fascinating. Our brains can process information faster when we're under pressure.
Really?
Yeah, and it makes time feel longer. But for Zelko, ejecting from the aircraft was just the start of another problem.
Because now he's behind enemy lines.
Yeah, and that's where his story gets even more intense.
Right, he has to survive now.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And his training kicks in. He knows he needs to blend in, contact his rescuer somehow.
So what does he do?
He covers himself in mud for camouflage.
Smart.
Yeah, he used everything he learned to disappear,
Like he's become a ghost again.
in a way. And that's when he has this really unexpected encounter.
What do you mean?
He comes face to face with a dog.
Oh, wow. So now what? You've just ejected from a stealth fighter.
Right, you're surrounded by the enemy.
And now there's a dog.
It's a crazy situation.
So what did he do? Did he?
It's amazing. He hesitated. He thought about it, to protect himself.
Wow.
But ultimately, he decided against it.
That's a tough call to make in that moment.
It is,
Well-
but it shows his character.
Yeah.
Even in war, there's still room for compassion.
It does. I mean, it really humanizes the whole experience.
Yeah. So the dog goes on its way,
Yeah.
and Zelko keeps trying to evade capture.
Right. But how does he contact the rescue team?
Well, a U.S. rescue team picks up his distress signal,
Okay.
and to help them find him, Zelko uses an infrared strobe.
I see, but that's visible to the Serbian forces too, right?
It is. They're closing in on his position.
So it's a race against time now.
Exactly. The rescue helicopter lands,
Oh, man.
and Zelko gets on just as Serbian troops arrive.
That's crazy. Talk about a close call.
He barely made it. But while all that's going on, Zoltan Dani and his team are celebrating.
They pulled off the impossible.
They shot down a stealth aircraft.
Incredible. And that achievement became a symbol?
Oh, yeah, a symbol of defiance.
Yeah.
Like they were challenging NATO's tech.
So what happens to the plane after all that?
That's where the story gets even wilder. And that's what we'll talk about in part 2.
Awesome. I can't wait. Okay, so we left off with Zelko making that crazy escape and Donnie's team, pulling off what everyone thought was impossible.
Right, like rewriting the rules of air combat.
Exactly. So let's talk about the wreckage of that F-117. What happened to it? Did it get totally blown apart, or did some of it survive?
That's where things get even more interesting. You see, the U.S. didn't actually destroy the wreckage.
They didn't. Why not? I mean, wouldn't they want to, blow it up or something?
You'd think so, right? To keep all those secrets safe.
Exactly.
Well, there are a few theories.
Yeah.
One is that rescuing Zelko was the top priority.
Right, of course.
And any attempt to destroy the wreckage would have put the rescue team in danger.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Another possibility is that the U.S. military thought even if the Serbs got the wreckage, they wouldn't be able to figure anything out.
So they underestimated them?
Maybe. Or maybe they felt like the tech was so advanced that any reverse engineering would just be pointless.
Interesting. So the Serbs ended up with all this stealth tech just handed to them.
Pretty much a treasure trove landing right in their lap.
So what did they do with it? Were they able to reverse engineer any of it?
It's hard to know for sure what they learned, but it's safe to say they got some valuable insights.
I bet.
And get this, you can still see pieces of Zelko's F-117 on display
Really?
at the Aviation Museum in Belgrade.
Wow. So they're showing it off like a
Right.
trophy.
Yeah. It's a pretty powerful image, a symbol of their victory over a superpower.
I can see that. You mentioned earlier that the Serbs had some intel that stealth aircraft were in the area.
Right. They knew something was up.
What kind of intel was it? Was it just rumors? Or was it more solid?
That's a question that's been debated for years. There's still a lot of mystery around it.
I bet.
What we do know is that the Serbs had a surprisingly good intelligence network during the war.
So it wasn't just luck?
No, They had some inside information.
Like what?
Some reports suggest they could access NATO communications.
Really? So they were listening in on them?
Possibly through intercepted radio transmissions or something.
Wow. That's like some spy movie stuff.
It is. And there's even speculation about human sources within NATO.
No way! Like double agent?
It's never been confirmed, but it's a possibility.
That's crazy to think they had people on the inside.
It shows how important intelligence is in warfare.
Yeah, one little piece of information can change everything.
Exactly. And in this case, it might have been what helped them bring down the F-117.
It's amazing how this one event has so many layers to it. The tech, the strategy, the human element.
Right, and the espionage angle.
It's like this puzzle with all these pieces fitting together.
It is, and we're not done yet. This wasn't just a military event.
Right, it had global implications.
Exactly. So we need to talk about how NATO reacted.
I bet they were shocked. I mean, this was their invincible weapon.
It was a major blow. Not just losing the aircraft, but the prestige.
Right, it challenged their whole image.
Exactly. The F-117 was a symbol of their tech dominance.
So how did they respond?
Well, they had to acknowledge it, to some extent. They couldn't just ignore the fact that it had been shot down.
So did it change how they used the F-117? Did they ground the fleet?
They kept using it, but they changed their tactics.
Like how?
For example, they started flying the F-117 at higher altitudes to stay away from those low-frequency radar systems.
That makes sense.
And they also increased electronic warfare support to jam enemy radar and protect the aircraft.
So they learned and adapted.
They did. The incident made them think about the balance between stealth and other things.
Like what?
Electronic countermeasures, maneuverability.
So it wasn't just about being invisible anymore.
Right. It's crazy how one event can have such a big impact.
I know. It changed their tactics, their tech, and even how they think about fighting wars.
It shows that warfare is constantly evolving.
Like necessity is the mother of invention.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But let's not forget about Zelko and Donnie.
Right. What happened to them after the war?
Well, Zelko continued his military career and retired as a colonel.
Okay.
And Donnie also kept serving in the Serbian military and became a general.
So they both had successful careers.
They did. And you know, Zelko always wanted to meet the guy who shot him down.
Really? Why? To confront him?
No, it was more about respect.
Respect for the guy who shot him down.
Yeah, he wanted to acknowledge Donnie's skill. It's a pretty remarkable thing to do.
It is. So did they actually meet?
They did in
On
2011 at an air show in Belgrade.
Wow. What are the chances?
There are pictures of them shaking hands, smiling, even having a toast together.
That's incredible. It sounds like they really respected each other.
They did, despite being on opposite sides of a war.
It's a good reminder that even in war, there can be humanity.
Absolutely. But there's more to this story. The F-117 shoot-down had a lasting impact on military thinking.
Right. We talked about the tactics, the intelligence, the human element.
But we need to look at the long-term consequences.
How did it change how people viewed stealth tech?
And did it change how air power is used today?
Those are the big questions. And that's what we'll discuss in part 3. We've been through a lot, haven't we? From that night in Serbia to the wreckage and then Zelko and Donnie meeting up. It's a wild story. But let's get to the big question. How did shooting down that F-117 change things for stealth tech?
You know what's really interesting is that it didn't make people give up on stealth.
I would have thought that's exactly what would happen.
Do you think so, right?
Yeah, it's like this big failure.
It did show some weaknesses for sure, but it also gave us a ton of data, like a real test. And remember, the F-117 was designed back in the 70s.
Oh, wow, that's a while ago.
It was cutting edge back then. But tech, especially military tech, changes so fast.
You're like those old cell phones we used to have, huge and clunky.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The F-117 was like that. Amazing for its time, but then quickly outdated. The designers really focused on radar evasion.
Right, being invisible.
But sometimes they had to sacrifice other things, like it couldn't maneuver that well. And it didn't have systems for electronic countermeasures.
Which we talked about before.
Right. And those things played a part in why it was so vulnerable.
Once they were spotted?
Yeah, it's like they were so focused on stealth that they forgot about everything else.
Almost like they thought it was a magic bullet.
I guess so. But the F-117 incident was a wake-up call. They realized they needed planes that were stealthy, but also...
More than that.
Right? They needed them to be agile, versatile, and have better countermeasures.
So they used what they learned to make better stealth planes.
That's right. The F-22 Raptor and the F-35 Lightning II. Those are the main stealth planes the U.S. uses now.
I've heard of those.
And they use better materials, computer modeling, and sensor tech to be even stealthier.
Wow, so they're like the next generation.
They are. And they're also way more maneuverable than the F-117.
So they can dodge missiles if they need to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Do they fix the countermeasures problem too?
Yeah, they did.
Yeah.
These newer planes are packed with electronic countermeasures. To do what exactly?
They're jam enemy radar and mess with their targeting systems.
So it's like a multi-layered defense now.
It is. They're not putting all their eggs in one basket anymore.
Right. So they took the best of both worlds.
You got a stealth plus options if they get spotted.
Makes sense. So Danny and his team, by shooting down that plane, might have actually helped make stealth tech better.
It's possible. It forced the U.S. to rethink their tactics and their tech.
And ultimately, it led to those improvements.
It's a great example of how progress often comes from failure, you know?
Like learning from your mistakes.
Yeah, and pushing the limits of what's possible. But it wasn't just about the tech. The F-117 incident sparked a big debate about the future of air power.
Really? What were people saying?
Some people thought it showed that stealth wasn't enough,
That
maybe they should focus on electronic warfare and long-range missiles instead.
So did it change how air power is used today?
It's tough to say if it was the only reason, but it definitely played a part. It showed how important it is to be adaptable.
To be ready for anything.
Right. And that no single tech can guarantee victory.
The only constant is change, right?
Exactly. And in warfare, that change is driven by tech strategy and, yeah, even unexpected events like the F-117 getting shot down.
It reminds us that history isn't just dates and facts.
It's about stories.
Like this one.
Stories of courage and ingenuity and people pushing the limits.
Yeah, and even with all the tech we have, the human element is still at the heart of it all.
Absolutely. The pilots, the people who design and counter the tech, the people who risk their lives, it's all connected.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the F-117 shootdown, what are the big takeaways?
But what does the future of warfare look like? Will stealth still be important, or will something new come along?
And how will humans adapt to all these changes?
We can't predict the future, but looking at the past helps us understand how complex modern warfare really is.
That's a great point. I think that's a good place to end it. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Be sure to check out the Yarn Hub video for yourself. And until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.